Welcome to the What's the BPM podcast. Ivan Gough, thanks for being here, mate.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, been looking forward to this one. A little bit of back and forth getting it organised, but we're here.
It's nice to talk a bit about what my past and stuff. It's nice.
Yeah, I mean, doing the research for this podcast, I've been through and I've been looking up what records you've been involved in. There's tons that I did, massive tunes that you're involved in that I didn't even know. But I reckon we'll cover that as we get through it a bit later on. But being this is about the history of the Australian scene. We've got to talk about the old days, which is my favourite part of the story.
Yes. Yeah.
So do you want to walk us through the early days of your career, how it all started?
Well, I suppose we've got to go back to the early '80s when I started to recognise the music that I was interested in always had keyboards, synthesizers. In the early days, even before then, I've wondered. I guess I've pondered where our music taste comes from. Why is it we like particular things? I don't know whether it's partly hardwired when we're born, or whether it's to do with early childhood experiences. But I know that my grandfather used to play, but they were called Hammond organ records. They were quite popular in the late '70s. Basically, guys just playing jazz standards on big Hammond organs. And he used to play them, and I was quite mesmerised by the sound. And I can remember being in a local shopping centre, and they had in the foyer, they used to have a guy there who would play on a big Hammond keyboard organ. And I used to say to my mum, just leave me here. I want to listen to this guy. You go do the shopping, and I'll just sit and listen to this. So, yeah, I'm not sure where that happened, but that I knew that by around the turn of the '80s, I knew that my interest was in electronic music of one sort or another. There wasn't a lot of it, but I knew that that's where my taste was going to be. And I guess one of the big moments for me was we used to have a shop down here called Brash's. Doesn't exist anymore, but Brash's used to be the place that sold records and tapes, and they also had synthesizers and drum machines and other things. And I can still remember there was a guy doing a demonstration on a Roland synthesizer. It's like a Juno 60 or something, and I could hear the sound from across the shopping centre. And I said to my mum, I said, listen, I've got to go and see what's going on over here. Come and get me. And I ran over to the shop, and I stood there, and I was just mesmerised watching this guy play on a synthesizer. It was the first time I'd seen a synth in real life, and it was, that was a big moment for me, because I was like, okay, this is where the sounds that I like come from. And that night, I can still remember going home and not being able to sleep very well, trying to figure out how I could get my hands on one, because I thought I was too young. I didn't have any money, and so how am I going to get a synthesizer? But yeah, that was the kind of start point for me. It's right around the turn of the '80s when I started to notice synthesizers, and I started hearing them in records that I liked on radio and stuff like that. That was a big sort of turning point. I didn't know it was going to be a career at that point, but I was certainly, pretty obsessed with the whole thing.
I remember Brash's. When we first moved to Australia, that was like the kind of the music shop of the time. How much was like a synthesizer worth?
Well, it was. I think my first synth I ended up getting cost me about $600. It was a thing called a Roland Alpha Juno. I think I paid about $600 for it. But yeah, Brash's was. I mean, it was the go-to store. My Saturday used to be going into the city. I used to get $20. I'd go into the city. I had enough money to buy some lunch at McDonald's. Then I'd go down to the arcade place, play the games, and then I would go to the Brash's store. And on the third floor in the city store, which they had like a big 4-story musician's shop in town, on the third floor was all the electronic music instruments, the samplers and drum machines. And I used to drive the guys in the shop crazy because I never bought anything, but I used to grab a pair of headphones and go and play all the keyboards and drum machines, and they'd roll their eyes whenever they see me walk in. But yeah, that was my Saturday afternoon, was hanging around the Brash's store just playing on all the keyboards.
$600 is a lot of money, especially back then.
It was. I worked for I was probably about, I must have been 15 or so. I worked the whole school holidays for my dad to get the money, and I also I think I might have borrowed a bit off my mum as well. But yeah, I got enough money to get it, and I couldn't do anything with it. I mean, it was I wasn't a pianist. I didn't really. I'd learnt how to program it, because I was studying electronics at school. So I learnt a little bit about what an oscillator was and what did a filter do and all that sort of stuff. So I had a pretty good grounding in how the sounds were made in a synthesizer. So I just had to go through lots of menus to figure out how to do stuff. But yeah, it was a pretty exciting time. I couldn't do anything good with it, but it certainly was. Yeah, but that was my first synth. I think it was $650, something like that.
And so, are you hearing like electronic music starting to? Are they playing it on the radio a little bit? You're hearing a bit here and there.
Well, yeah. I mean, the record that really, I guess, pointed to what was coming was a track called Vienna by Ultravox, a massive record, and it was a big pop tune. I mean, it was so profound. It actually used to come at me in my dreams. I'd hear the vocal in my head, and I didn't know what the song was. And then one day it came on the radio, and fortunately, I went, "Oh, that's the track that I've been trying to work out what it is." And the DJ back announced it, and he said, "Oh, this is Ultravox with Vienna." And of course, I went straight to the Brasher store, bought the 7-inch single of it, and played it nonstop. And it was so impressive because up to that point, everything that I'd listened to was guitar-based music. I mean, my folks, I grew up. My parents were interested in. Well, my dad liked a little bit of classical music, but mostly we listened to a lot of the '70s kind of singer-songwriter. Simon and Garfunkel and Neil Diamond and John Denver and that kind of stuff. So to hear a record like Vienna that was almost entirely made with synthesizers and drum machines, it was just, wow, how do they do that? Where do they make those sounds? So that was a pretty significant record for me, and certainly it was the first ever, I guess, all electronic pop record that I ever heard that really, and that was the direction. Once I heard that record, it was all over. I wasn't interested in anything else. That
And
was it.
so, and that kind of led you on the path towards like house
Yep.
music and
I started to discover after that. The next thing was listening to Vangelis and Jean-Michel Jarre and a lot of those synthesizer kind of pioneers. I mean, Vangelis is still my favorite artist of all time. He did the what's the film with Harrison Ford in it?
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner soundtrack.
Beautiful music, hey.
Just yeah. I went to see the film Chariots of Fire because I liked the soundtrack so much. I was too young to understand the movie. My mum took me, but the music just. So yeah, that was right early '80s, right around the time when and then from there I started getting into a lot of the UK synth pop bands. So I was listening to New Order, Pet Shop Boys, Depeche Mode, that kind of stuff, which was kind of a little bit unusual for a guy out in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, because all my friends were listening to rock and Cold Chisel and Midnight Oil and stuff, and I liked all that, but the music that I really identified with was British synth pop. So yeah, that was that, and the first record was Vienna, and it went from there.
Funny side note, I have family that were actually in Chariots of Fire, the movie, back in the UK. Yeah.
No. It's
Yeah.
now, isn't it? I think it's the comedian Stephen Fry. He's actually in it somewhere. He was standing at the. I
Really?
think when they're running around one of the ovals, he was one of the extras at the. Yeah, I read his book.
Wow.
It was one of his first ever experiences in front of the camera. But yeah, great movie. And now I watched it. I've watched it more recently and obviously understand it a lot better. But the soundtrack was something else. I mean that main theme is just, it is the sporting anthem nowadays, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Pops up at every
just
Olympic.
awesome.
Mm.
But mate, so you're from Melbourne.
Yes.
For people who don't know. Did you start going to nightclubs or because the Melbourne's has always kind of had a really strong music scene. Like, how did you get interested in the nightclub scene and being a DJ?
The first thing was the local hotel, the pub in my local suburb, just probably 10 minutes from here. They had a disco. So this is mid-'80s, before it was before hotels were allowed to put poker machines. So the poker machines they were banned in Victoria at that time. And so a lot of the suburb hotels that they had, function rooms, they turned them into discos because they could fill them up 3-4 nights a week. In the '70s when disco took off, the discotheque became the place to hang out, and it stayed that way through the '80s. So we had a local disco, and I used to, go in. I think I was about 16 when I first went there, but it was an eye-opening experience because the DJs had to play music to make you dance. And so at the time, I was listening to a lot of Euro disco was the kind of, or Italo disco, I guess, was the popular music of the day, plus a little bit of Madonna and the usual kind of suspects. But they all had, the thing that really impressed me was they all had, special remixes of tracks that you didn't hear on the radio. So that was my first kind of foray, was just sneaking into the local disco and just absorbing what was going on. This is probably a couple of years before house music took off. But when I started hearing Euro disco and started hearing records that, boom, 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 let's go back to my room, and there was a track called Mama Told Me by Fantastic, and Taffy, I Love My Radio, and these were records that you just didn't hear on commercial radio, but in the discos they were huge. And so that Italo disco sort of sound was the first thing that really captivated me. And I started listening to, the other thing was I lived a good almost an hour out of Melbourne, and I was in a gully, and so I couldn't really pick up much more than the bigger radio stations. But eventually, long story short, I got up on the roof, put up an FM antenna, and I started to be able to pick up some of the indie stations in Melbourne. So I was listening to Triple R and PBS, and they had niche market music shows. And so on Friday night, they had a show called The Pulsation Club on Triple R, I think it was. And it was all disco and Euro disco and Italo disco and all that stuff that was getting played in clubs. So I started tuning in, and I had a cassette recorder, so I record them all, and then I play the cassette back all week listening to the tracks, and I started to recognize these were 12-inch mixes and extended versions, and so that's where it all kind of started for me, was just being able to pick up stations other than the main commercial stations. I started to be able to, and that allowed me to hear different music, better music, interesting music.
And so could you purchase them on vinyl, or you just start looking for them?
Yes and no. The local Brushes stores, and then eventually later on that became Sanity. That was the big record store. Yes, they did have a 12-inch vinyl section, so they did have extended mixes of some things. It was a pretty limited selection. But one day I discovered Central Station, the big record store in Melbourne, and that was all dance music. And when I went in there, it was like, boom, what is this? If all of a sudden there's walls and walls of 12-inch mixes and special edits and remixes of things, and I just was like, whoa. I didn't have enough money to buy many records back then, so it was a bit of a limited purchase to start with, but that was also a really key ingredient for me, was discovering Central Station Records, because I met a few guys out in the eastern suburbs who were DJing, and they said to me, "Oh, you've got to go into the city to Central Station." And I was like, "Okay, what's that? Is that like Flinders Street Station?" And they're like, "No, it's a record store that sells dance music." And I was like, "Oh, okay, right, yep, cool." So I had no idea, but that was the next big step, I guess, was discovering Central and being able to buy records that I was hearing on the radio stations.
So is that late 80s now, or like
Yeah,
87,
yeah.
88?
And the other thing was I used to tune into a station called 3RPP, which was down on the peninsula. And they broadcast, their Saturday night show was broadcast directly out of the 21st Century nightclub. So you were listening to the DJ as they were playing to a crowd. And that was a really key, because I'd write down the names of the tracks, or I'd take the cassette into the Central Station store and I'd play it to them on my headphones. What's this record?
Yeah.
And oh, you want this one, So yeah, that was also another key ingredient.
Unreal.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. And it was just before house music started to break through as well.
So did you then start saying, "Oh, I'm going to buy some turntables," or?
Yeah, well, initially, I always wanted to produce. I was impressed. I think I guess the key ingredient for me was listening to records made particularly on drum machines, and I was impressed with how do they make the snare drum sound like that? I'd go into the school music room and hit the snare drum. It didn't sound anything like the one on the record. So I started to kind of buy music magazines.
Shit, so even back then you were like fully nerding out.
Yeah, but I was like now starting to go, okay, they're using a compressor. What's a compressor do? What's an equalizer do? Oh, it's bass and treble control, but more advanced. Right. So I started to figure out how they were doing stuff. And I wanted to produce. But my first interest initially was, I thought, I actually want to set up a recording studio. I want to record bands and mix bands. And so I started to convert my parents' garage. I started to buy microphones and tape machines, and I was scouring the secondhand newspapers every week to buy bits and pieces. But when I started going to clubs, and it was probably about 86, 87, I started to see guys playing on turntables and looking around at it. I was like, oh God, what are they doing here? This the turntable. What is this? Technics. What's a Technics? And I went into there was a disco shop about 15 minutes from my place. And I wandered in, and I said to the guy, I said, listen, I want to find out about DJ turntables. And he showed me, he said, well, these are the cheap ones over here. He said, and these are the gold standard. This is the Technics SL1200 Mark II. And I went, how much is that? They're $650 each. Okay, I'll be back in a couple of weeks. So I disappeared. And the other vital thing that happened at that time was one night I was listening to the radio station, and they had a big track that was called Beat This by Bomb the Bass. And the guy who did it, a bloke by the name of Tim Simonon, a UK producer, they were interviewing him, and they asked him about how the record came about. And he said, I went down the shop, bought a sampler, bought a drum machine, bought a synthesizer, and I started making my own records. And 12 months later, I had a hit. And this was a vital ingredient for my future, because all of a sudden I realized, you know what, maybe I don't need a recording studio. Yeah. I can do this on my own. I can just go and buy. So I sold all my recording stuff that I was buying, the tape machine, and I had microphones and a few other things. I sold the whole lot, started buying more synthesizers and drum machines. And then I started going to clubs, and I thought, you know what, if I can DJ, I can maybe free up my time during the week to produce, which is what I really wanted to do.
Oh, so you were working.
That was when the DJing
day.
thing came. And I met a couple of guys out in the eastern suburbs. One of them was an old school friend of mine, and he was hanging out with a bunch of DJs. They were all into hip hop and doing illegal stuff like painting trains and graffiti artists, and they were breakdancing and all this kind of stuff. And I started hanging around with them, and that was when I thought, you know what, maybe I'll get myself some turntables, learn how to DJ, then maybe I can work in clubs and make some money. This will allow me to spend my days during the week producing. So it took a few years for it all to kind of click into place, because my parents wanted me to get a real job, of course, as they did back then. But yeah, somewhere around about 1991, I think, I walked away from my real job, which was in electronics, and I went into DJing full time. And that was, 34 years ago. And I've been doing it ever since. But yeah, the turntables came secondary after, because producing was always my first love. And I thought, if I can DJ, I can earn enough money so I can produce during the week. So I don't have to have a job during the week. I can work on records.
That's nuts. And so you got a few gigs and you were earning enough money.
Yeah. I started out, like most kids did. I got the Wednesday night slot at a club that was half empty, and I got paid $60 for the whole night. So it wasn't a lot of money. But the guy who ran the club, he gave me an opportunity. And I messed up a few times, and I think the record ran out one night when I was sitting on the toilet. So that was, you live and learn. But it was a learning curve, and it was also back in those days, a lot of the clubs in Melbourne were open format style, so you had to play a lot of 70s records and rock tunes and all that sort of stuff. So I learned how to work a crowd, and it was tricky. Some nights it was dead, other nights it was busy. But I learned how to program for a crowd, and that DJing in those sorts of places to start off with, that gave me a good education, which I used later on when I was playing in front of 20,000 people and stuff. I sort of knew when I needed to play a big record. I knew when to pull back and stuff, and that came from working in those sort of beer barn kind of pubs and stuff back in the early days.
Not to get sidetracked, but do you think that that's like something that's majorly missing these days? Is like a lot of these young guys make a couple of records, they make a big hit, and then next thing they're playing in massive clubs, festivals, and they haven't really done their apprenticeship DJing?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of old school DJs who I would say the word's probably angry a little bit at what's going on around the place. Good looking people doing sets because they're good-looking people, and perhaps not, as you say, not having paid their dues.
Yeah,
I'm a little bit more. I respect both sides. I think if you are an entertainer, there are certain DJs that I've seen. I mean, I DJ'd a couple of times and hung out with Tim Avicii. Now, he by his own admission, he wasn't really a DJ. He was a producer, but he produced some of the biggest records of the day. So the crowd, were quite happy to listen to him play his tracks. And there's still a lot of today. There's still a lot of DJs. I mean, it's quite common for DJs to have one or two breakout hits. I mean, I don't know. I guess if people are enjoying it, it's not for me. I think the bigger issue at the moment is we've lost the connection with the music. It's all, you see too many clubs, or more importantly, festivals and raves today where you see a whole bunch of people standing there holding their phones up. And it's like, you know what? It's not really what it's about. Like for me, the thing that I always loved was being on a dance floor in my own space, listening to a DJ who was maybe playing, I saw guys like Dannington Agler, he'd play 14-hour DJ set. And you just got lost in the music. There were no phones. There was no, you were just there copping it, and those sorts of magic moments. I think a lot of the festivals today kind of miss that, I don't reckon anything good ever happens at 4 p.m. It's 4 a.m. when the good stuff happens, when you're out and just copping it. And I think, that's a little disappointing, but I get it. I mean, I've seen obviously a lot of the videos from some of the bigger acts like Anima and stuff who their whole set is more of a live experience. Same with Eric Prydz. His whole set's a live experience, and it really is something a sight to behold. It's amazing, no question about it. But I think it's a world away from the raving and the way that clubs used to be back in the old days. But there are still places like that. I hear of, there's clubs in the UK now where you've got to hand your phone over when you get in the front door, and there's people who are actually trying to make it more about the music again, which I think that's a good thing. That's important.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Definitely.
Sorry, man. We got a bit sidetracked there, but yeah. So you're DJing. You started making your own music. Do you want to tell us about that? The story with Oakenfold. You heard a tape of him.
Yeah, so I made a record. It was with a guy I was DJing with out in the eastern suburbs, and he was collecting studio equipment, drum machines and samples like me. And he played me a cassette of a track he was working on one night, and he asked me if I wanted to help him finish it. And I loved it. I said, yep. And I had a fairly decent setup in my parents' garage, so I said, bring your gear to my place. And so he brought it over and we finished off the record. And it was a track called I Need You. They called themselves, it was him and another guy, a friend of mine was Noel and his friend Julian, and they called themselves Pendulum. It's not the Pendulum that most people would know from the Western Australia scene, but this is Pendulum 1993. And yeah, we finished the record. The guys at Vicious Vinyl, John Corse and Andy Van, who are friends of mine, they liked it. So we got it mixed properly in a studio in the city and put it out on vinyl. And it got released in the UK. It was right around the time when Mushroom Records were trying to break into the UK market. So they had a label set up over there. They had a couple of A&R guys from Australia who were working there. And so the track got pushed out through the record stores in London. It was hard to find. But I think it must have been about 9 months later, so it would have been roughly the end of 94, I got a cassette sent back, and it was Paul Oakenfold playing live at the Q Club in Birmingham, and in the middle of the set, he's playing my record. And just listening to it, they had the crowd mic'd up, and it was on Radio 1 live, and it was right across the UK, and it was such a moment for me. It was a really good push-along because I never knew if anybody was going to hear my music, and to have that, and to have Paul Oakenfold, who was arguably the biggest DJ in the world at the time, certainly the biggest DJ in the UK, to have him play it was just amazing. Since learned, now that old playlists and stuff have cropped up around the place, I know that Pete Tong was playing it. I know that Sasha was playing it. John Digweed was playing it. A lot of the big DJs back then were playing it. So, but yeah, I was just, when I heard the cassette, I was like, oh my God, he's playing my record. Like it was something, that's for sure. And it was just a little push along I needed to keep going. And that was right around the time when I thought, maybe I can make a career out of this.
Those guys don't play anything that's not amazing either. They don't play any crap tunes. So that must have been just
Well, it was a big. It
Yeah.
had a big sort of drop at the end and stuff, and just hearing the crowd screaming over the breakdown. Literally, the place was lit up. I'm just disappointed there wasn't a video of it. Actually, it would have been lovely to see,
Yeah.
but you can hear the crowd visible. Like they're going off in the background. So yeah, it was quite a moment actually, and just a little push along. I think I needed at the time.
And then so that just fired you up to just get stuck in. And you
Well,
start
yeah, I
making
mean, you've
more
got to remember
tunes.
too that the scene in Melbourne was a little bit different. We had our big clubs down here, but Europe was, house music was just right across Europe, and it was massive. Right across all the Ibiza and the Greek islands, and everywhere you went, house music and everything just took off. And pretty soon there was drum and bass, jungle, trance, all these other, breakbeat, hardcore, all this kind of stuff. It was everywhere, and it was a much bigger scene, and so to get a foothold over there was kind of difficult, but to have that record at that time break through, it was big in Melbourne. And I know a few interstate DJs played it here, but it wasn't, Australia's always been a pretty cottage industry compared to Europe. So, but yeah, it was something, that's for sure.
I guess that leads into the next question. I was like going to ask what kind of drew you to more the progressive sound? I mean, maybe that helping kind of push you in that direction a little bit too?
I think there was a record actually that did it, and I like to consider this track as what I call proto progressive house, because it was certainly the first record that I heard that kind of pointed to what progressive house was going to become, and it was a track called French Kiss by Lil Louis, a very famous record from 80. Might have been 89, 88, I can't remember. But I can still remember the first time I heard it. It came on the radio. It was such a big record. It crossed over into the charts and it got on a commercial radio station. And I literally had to pull the car over and I was like, what the F is this? Turn the volume up and I just was like, I need to know what this record is. So they back announced it. Literally the next 24 hours I spent digging around record stores to find it. I found a copy and it still to this day is in my top 5 of all time. It was because I think the thing about progressive house that I guess sort of identified it was a groove, a very repetitive, a little bit like what Donna Summer's famous "I Feel Love" was back in the 70s. It was just a repetitive electronic record of nothing else than just a beat and a simple hook. But that's what progressive house became, and I guess that record, I don't know why I gravitated more towards that, but in terms of my music taste, I've always been more interested in melodies and arpeggiators and progressive house, progressive trance, melodic techno. That sort of music has always been a little bit more interesting to me rather than the disco and Daft Punk and sample based. I recognize the genius of Daft Punk, everyone does, but I was always more interested in listening to DJs like Sasha, Digweed, Oakenfold, Danny Tenaglia, those sorts of guys who were playing, tribal and repetitive sort of stuff with arpeggiators and synthesizers. And I think French Kiss was the first record I heard that really pointed to what that was going to become. So it was a very significant tune for me. And I'm not really sure why it is that I like progressive more than the rest, but I do. That's always been my thing.
Yeah, same here.
You know what it is? I think basically I'm a trance kid, but I like my trance music at house music tempo.
Bit deeper.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, like I played you a little snippet of I was digging through my records the other day and I found one of your really old tunes. What was it, 97, 98? I played it to you the other day.
Stars?
Yeah, Stars, yeah.
No,
nice
that's
one.
earlier than that. That's oh boy. Maybe it was. I think it was
so
95.
many tunes you don't even know, yeah.
Yeah, I've done mate, my back catalogue is deep.
Hundreds,
I'm gonna go with
mate.
95, I think it was. I had a studio on the side of the Mushroom distribution building in Port Melbourne. And I was working in one studio, and another friend of mine, Casey Taylor, who was a fantastic DJ and producer from Melbourne, he was in the other room. That was one of the first releases I had on that, and they had a label called DanceNet. And I mean, look, with my back catalogue, I've forgotten about more tunes. I still have people pull up remixes that I did that I don't even remember. Oh, wow, did I remix that? Okay, it's got my name on it, so it must be me.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the back catalogue, but you know what's funny? Because you do hear records from time to time, you recognise them, and then sometimes people come up to you and go, you know what, that record you did in 1996 was still one of my all-time favorites. It's like, oh, wow, it's nice to be remembered for tracks.
Yeah.
I remember one time driving down the street in 98, a rainy night in the city, and I got a phone call from somebody in San Francisco, and they'd gotten my phone number through the record company. It was the early days of mobile phones, and the guy from San Francisco calls me to tell me how much he liked one of my records. I was like, wow, that's just amazing, like some guy from San Francisco, I don't, to be even bothered to pick up the phone and call
Yeah.
me to tell me. It's like,
That's
wow.
cool.
Yeah,
Hey.
it was. It was really it's like, okay, that's fantastic. Nice.
So
Strange, but nice.
so in the early days, you were kind of moving towards that like progressive sound. How did you progress? How did you
Pardon the
like?
pun, yeah.
Yeah. How did you continue to grow? And then you moved to like was it Zero Tolerance
Yeah.
Records? Like, just tell us a bit about how all that like the
Well,
scene must have been growing with you at the
it
time.
began with DJ Sasha. Sasha from the UK was the I guess he was the kind of the vital ingredient in the early days, because he was the first DJ we heard who was mixing very deep, very smooth, kind of melodic progressive stuff. It was before progressive house even had a name, and it was I remember seeing him DJ at a club in Melbourne called the Chevron, and I couldn't even figure out what he was doing with the mixes and stuff like that. How was he doing this? And I met another very famous local DJ at the time, Anthony Papa, who went to the UK to work. I also met his friend Phil Kay, who I became fast friends with, and we were all interested in a similar sort of. We liked what Sasha was doing. It wasn't banging and noisy. Like when you listen to DJs like Paul Oakenfold, his music was fantastic, but it was a bit more energetic. Whereas Sasha was the kind of the side room DJ, if you like,
Yeah.
and the music that he put together. He'd play a 2-hour set, and it sounded like one record just slowly morphing. And so for us, we started to gravitate towards that sound early on. And a couple of Sasha sets had been recorded because he played a couple of years later at the Prince, or the Prince of it was called the Palais, I think, in Melbourne, which is not even there anymore. And the sets that he played had been recorded and copied on cassette. So I had my hands on the cassettes, and I just kept listening to all the stuff that he was playing, and I just fell in love with it. It was just as far as I was concerned, it was the future. So from there, by the late 90s, we were starting to, I guess the music started to get darker. And I was hanging around with guys like Phil Kay, for example. He was an absolute towering influence in my life, because he was a guy who just wanted to break the rules and find music so we started making music, and we started looking for anything that was different, that didn't fit the mold of what was out there currently. And so that's kind of how I started getting more into that really deep and dark stuff, which led into us setting up the label Zero Tolerance. It began with us, a lot of American. There was a lot of New York. You'd have the A side mix of something with a big vocal on it, and then there'd be this B side dark dub with just chopped up bits of vocals and very late night. Some of these records were 10 or 11-minute long, journeys. And that's kind of where we started to, and Sasha started playing some of these tracks in the early days. But by the late 90s, we were firmly, and at the time, it wasn't easy to find the kinds of records that we wanted to play. So then we sort of thought, well, you know what? Maybe we start making the records how we're hearing them. Maybe we start moving and producing records that way. And so Zero Tolerance was sort of born out of a little bit of frustration of not being able to find the kinds of records that were dark enough for us. We were trying to make the darkest possible records we could make. That was house music. We used to call it haunted house, because it was dark and menacing and 4 a.m. records. So that's kind
cool.
of, yeah. So I think it was partly born out of the music we were hearing, but also the music we weren't hearing and the stuff that we thought we needed to make. We wanted to go darker.
Unreal. So how long was you working at Zero Tolerance for?
Well, it started in 99. So long story short, I was working for the DMC record store. So it was a subsidiary of DMC UK. We had a DJ course and stuff, and we moved into a new shop that had an upstairs space, And Stuart Hanna, the guy that ran the shop, came to me one day and was interested. He said, look, we want to do a label and our own studio. What kind of equipment do I need? And I was between studios, if you like, at the time. And I said, look, why don't I just bring my gear here? You don't have to pay for anything. We'll just set it up upstairs and start making records. So we set up a studio upstairs. We bought a mixing console that came from the Arts Centre in Melbourne, 350 kilo mixer that I had to get my old man to build a frame for it so we could load it in through a window. We had to get a little crane in the back of the back alley and lift this 350 kilo. Then it took 6 of us to wheel it down the corridor on a trolley. It was, oh man, it was hilarious. But anyway, we set up a studio. So that was 99. And we ran Zero Tolerance ran through till about 2004, I guess, 2003, 2004. And in that time, we released, I don't know, there's probably 40 or 50 releases. I'm not really sure, actually. But we've released a lot of music. We built a big, loyal fan base worldwide because our music was probably darker and a bit more sort of a sound. It was quite different to what else was out there at the time. We had a lot of support from DJs in the UK, Sasha, John Digweed, Nick Warren, those sorts of guys played a lot of our music for us. And yeah, so we ran the studio upstairs and we would, we did a lot of late night sessions back in those days. So we'd get in the studio at 4 or 5 o'clock. A couple of guys I worked with, Gab Oliver and Phil Kay, they worked in the store downstairs. So we would wait till the shop was closed and then we'd go upstairs and work on tracks until 2 or 3 in the morning. And it was good times. Fantastic. And it was something that I'm really proud that I was part of because it was such a sound. In fact, it was so popular that the boys have actually relaunched Zero Tolerance recently. So they're putting out new music and I've got a couple of releases coming up with them soon. So exciting times. But yeah, it was great. It was great. And we still got, a lot of fans worldwide who come. I still have people coming up to me now, online saying, wow, Zero Tolerance, what a label. Didn't know you were part of it. I was like, yeah, because I'm known for a lot of other things, but Zero Tolerance was a big part of my history.
Can you think of any of just a couple of big tunes that Digweed and Sasha and that were playing from?
Well,
from
yeah, I
those
mean,
days?
so there was. We worked with Luke Schabel, who I discovered. He became a very famous producer at the time. I had a record called Too Heavy by the Deep Funk Project, which I did with Gab Oliver. That was a big record for the label. We also had a track called Lydian and the Dinosaur by Phil Kay and Andy Page. They call themselves the Hi-Fi Bugs. And that is a very important record in the progressive break scene, big UK track. Andy Page has gone on to work with Hans Zimmer, doing film scoring and all that sort of stuff. So that was a key record. And also Phil Kay and Luke Schabel formed a group called Low Step, and Sasha took them under his wing and remixed a couple of their tracks and put them on a couple of his albums and stuff. So that was a couple of significant tracks that So it was quite a significant time for us. And yeah, a lot of records that they still stand the test of time today. I was actually at a launch for a company launching a new set of studio speakers, $100,000 big monitors, and they had you could play. They had a Spotify connection, so you could play one of your own tracks. And so I pulled up Too Heavy, Deep Funk Project that I produced, and I was sitting there with a friend of mine, Klaus, who's a mastering engineer, Klaus Hill, who does a lot of mastering for people in Australia. And we played this track, and it just, mate, it was. He said to me, he goes, "When did you make this record?" I said, 2001. So I was nearly 25 years old, and it just sounded big and brutal. And I think one of the advantages we had at Zero Tolerance was we had that big mixing console, which is an old school analog desk. It had a sound to it that was pretty cool at the time. But yeah, they were good days. They were good days.
Unreal, man. That's like my, that's like my heyday. That period of my life, I was just obsessed with, Sasha Oakenfold. The majority of my record collection is all progressive house from around that era. I've got loads of stuff by you. Anything that Sasha was playing, I'd buy. Or
we're all the same. We'd try to find when we picked up. They used to have the Mix Mag Update, the weekly black and white magazine, and we'd try to find charts from DJs so we could figure out what records they were playing. There's a chart from Sasha, right? We get all those records. Didn't even listen to them. Just bought them if we could find them,
Just know you're gonna like it
Yeah.
if he likes it.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was a different era too. I mean, we had one big advantage too at Zero Tolerance because we had the record store downstairs. The shipments would arrive on Monday. They'd unpack it on a Tuesday. It'd arrive in the shop Tuesday morning. We'd unpack it. Tuesday night, we'd be in the studio, and Phil Kay he'd come running up the stairs with 2 or 3 vinyls under his arm. Hey, look, here's some new records. Listen to this. And we'd hear the new tracks that were coming in from overseas, and that would sort of inform the direction we would. Oh, that's a great idea. And we'd pinch ideas off brand new records to put in our tracks. So we tried to kind of stay. It allowed us to stay as relevant as possible, maybe even a little ahead of the curve if we could. You know? So, having the record store and just having access to records before all the DJs and punters got to hear them was a little bit of an advantage. You know, I remember the first time Phil came running up the stairs. You've got to hear this track. This is a group called Chicane. Who? Chicane. Right. This is their record, Offshore. And he played Offshore by Chicane. Yeah. And I just went far out. I quit. That's it. I can't. That's it. I'm out. I'm done here. This is too good. It was, mate, that was embarrassingly good, that record. And really that informed a lot of what we did at Zero Tolerance, was just having the record store and having access to brand new records.
I sort of felt like I fell out of love with the prog scene around, I don't know, maybe like 03, 04. I started getting into like techno and stuff, but like, I think maybe like vinyl sales might have been slowing down a bit then too. I think the CDJs was starting to come in. Like,
well, you're going to ask me in a minute how I ended up with TV Rock, and you've just answered that question already. Because around 03, 04, I became quite jaded with the sound of progressive. I think it got a little stale at the time. I think it was a bit too many of the records I was getting was sounding the same, and I was looking for anything else.
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt. It just
my gravitation at that time, the pull was towards electro and indie electro sort of stuff. But yeah, it was definitely that time, because I'd been listening to progressive since before it was progressive. So we're going back to 1990. This is 13, 14 years I've been listening to it. And it just started to get a little bit old. I was like, you know what? I need to hear something fresh. And I started looking elsewhere, and I found it in the electro sound, which was coming through at the time. But yeah, I'm with you. At that moment, I was like, yeah, I'm a bit bored. And I remember Phil Kay, me and Phil were listening to some tracks one day, and we coined the term bog prog. That was Phil was always a bit funny about, this is all bog prog. It's like, it sounds the same, you know. Phil was another guy who probably influenced a little bit what I was doing, because he would just be like, mate, I've heard this before. What, you know, he was a hound for trying to find records that were different, new, fresh. Anything that was just, you know, he'd play records by producers like Tipper. He pulled a record out one night, and I remember he played it to me, and I went, Jesus, how are you going to play this, Phil? He goes, watch. And that Saturday night, I'm at the gig at Sunny, and he pulled it out and played it, and the place went off. And it was just, you know, he'd find the most obscure random records and go, I'll make this work. And that was, I think, also part of why I shifted away, because I kept thinking, you know what, I got to keep hearing Phil in my head going, look for something fresh, something new, something different.
Yeah.
That is something that I tell producers today making records. You want to get noticed? Be different. Stand out somehow. Find a way to stand out. That is the most important thing as a producer that you can do. If you go out there and make melodic techno and it sounds like Anima or everyone else, don't bother. You're wasting your time. You'll never get anywhere. You know, it's a big issue today. But even back then, I was always trying to reinvent myself. Every couple of months, I'd be like, okay, what can I do that hasn't been done? You know? And that was, I think, from hanging around with Phil. And it was, like I said, it was around that 2003 period. I just was like, you know what? I'm bored with prog. I want to find something else. And so I did.
So how did you get, so you, like, for my memory, the electro stuff started coming in. Like, I was hearing it a little bit on like places like Radio 1, and there was some new DJs coming through. I think Fergie at the time was maybe moving from the hard stuff to like kind of techno and a bit of electro stuff. Yeah. Is that like, how did you sort of discover it?
Yeah, I mean, there were two things, two key moments. One was Triple J. They used to have a Sunday night show called The Rhythm Method. And I don't know what I was driving around one Sunday night. I had it on in the car, and they had this. They had a female DJ who was on playing a whole bunch of new records coming out of Berlin. and they were records on a label called B Pitch Control, and also DJ Hell's record label, International DJ Gigolos. And it was it was a cross between techno and electro. And I can still remember pulling into the driveway at my place and going, there was still 45 minutes of the show left. And I said, you know what? I need to listen to the rest of this. This is unbelievable. So I took the car out and drove around for another 45 minutes just listening to this radio show. And the whole night was just this, it was underground electronic music that was for dancing from Berlin. It was all lower tempo. It was darker and more like, I guess, more electronic is probably the bit,
Yeah.
It was like, okay, if Kraftwerk were making dance music, this is what it would sound like, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that was a vital ingredient. The second thing was I got my hands on a compilation CD from a label called Output Recordings, and it had on it a bunch of, it was Fisher Spooner, and it had LCD Sound System, and a bunch of this new indie sort of stuff. It had the guys the Rapture that did House of the Jealous Lovers, and it was like garage rock, but there was also some electronic stuff in there as well. And that was also, I listened to that in my car nonstop for about 3 months, just absorbing it. And it was a cross between indie electronica and garage rock from the 60s, and it was all this kind of mashed up stuff. And then the final ingredient was when I got dragged along to Melbourne's now infamous One Love club.
Oh, yeah.
John Course had started DJing there, and John was a big friend, a good friend of mine, and I was a big fan of him. And he said, come along and have a look at what's going on at One Love. And I walked in, and they were playing, it was house music, but it had a lot of electro influence. It was new music, and the place was lit up. It was just kids screaming the entire night, pointing at the DJ, jumping around. The DJ, because originally the club had, the DJ console was tucked away in the corner, and John, when they took over the night, John said to the guys running it, let's put the DJ console right fair and square in the center of the stage so everybody can connect with the DJ. And it was, man, I walked in and I was like, what the hell's going on here? I left that club with a whole new set of rules. I was like, okay, this is what I need. I need to get into this. So I started looking for more records like that at the record shops, and a lot of that stuff started coming through from the UK and Europe. And that was probably 2004. And that's when I really started to kind of go, you know what, this is the new sound I've been looking for. It's electro. It's I was listening to DJs like Tom Neville, and Tigger was breaking through, and people like that. It was an exciting time for sure. And so that's
who were the One Love DJs at the time that
well, it was initially so One Love was started by a guy called Peter Raff and Frank Catella. I mean, Peter Raff's a legend of the Melbourne scene. He promoted some of the best nights in the history of the Melbourne club scene. Frank Catella was at the time doing art. He did a lot of the flyers for the clubs and stuff, and they paired up and took over the Prince of Wales band room on a Saturday night. And it was John Course was the main DJ. Another guy, Frankie D, was playing, and a guy I started working with, Grant Smillie, was working there. There were a few other DJs that played at the same time, but I think probably John Course and Grant Smillie were the kingpin DJs at the time that I was going. And John particularly, I mean, John he's the best DJ I've ever seen come out of Australia. He is just, his programming skills, his technical ability. I've never seen anyone who can rock a crowd the way that John Course can. He can play more underground when he needs to. He can play the anthems when he needs to, but not be cheesy. He's one of those guys who is just the DJ's DJ. And those guys, they took control of the room. Grant was a fantastic DJ. Grant was a gadabout town, good-looking guy, had a lot of connections, knew everybody. So between the two of them, they really created something pretty special in that room. And to walk in, I remember the first night I walked in, and I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. Just to see a whole crowd screaming the entire night and just, losing it was something else.
And energy.
Yeah.
The energy in the room.
Cut through it. It was the energy in the room that night was just, mate, it was unbelievable. So,
I mean, we've got to talk about the TV rock part of the story. So how did you meet Grant? Just through going to One Love?
Well, it was through there. I spoke to Coursey one night and said, listen, man, I want to get into this. How do I need to find a DJ to work with. And he said, well, you need to meet Grant Smillie. So we got introduced, and I I'd probably met Grant from around the traps before. I don't recall, but we'd certainly been in clubs at the same time. He's 10 years younger than me. So, yeah, I said, listen, man, and he was actually, they were playing a record. I did a remix of a track that was quite big at One Love at the time. And so I said to Grant, listen, man, I'm working on some tunes. You want to come and hang out in the studio? And he's like, yeah, man, I'd love to. So he came to my place and we started working on ideas pretty quickly and did a couple of remixes. And then we probably were about, I guess it was sometime early 95. We did a late 94, early 95. We did a remix of a track called Been Good by
Sorry,
Deep Face.
do you mean 2005?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
sorry.
did I say, 95?
95, yeah.
Yeah, 2005, thank you. So I think it was late 2004, early mate, let's go with 2005. We did a remix of a track called Been Good, and it became a bit of a Melbourne anthem.
Sorry,
And
what was that? What was the remix?
it was called Been Good by Deep Face. And the guys were being managed by a friend of mine, and they were one of the girls, Gabby Columbia, a very famous. She runs global PR and looks after promoting records for DJs in Australia. She contacted me and said, "Look, we've got this track. You guys want to remix it?" We're like, "Yeah, no worries." And I got sent all these. It was like about 4 gigabytes of guitar parts and all this rock. And I took a 3-second snippet of the guitar and did a remix out of that. Built it out of this tiny little section of guitar, and it became quite big in Melbourne. So Grant and I started to do more stuff together. At the time, he was running a PR company. He ended up getting out of that and started working with me full time on records. And by late 2005, that's when we started working on the track that would end up becoming Flaunt It, that became the big hit. And we sort of thought we need a name. I don't know how we came upon TV Rock, can't remember. But yeah, it was probably late 2005 when we started using that name. And yeah, it literally started out doing a couple of days a week, and pretty soon we were working full time on records.
That's awesome. Mate, I can remember I was DJing at a nightclub on the Sunshine Coast called 240V. Anyone up the coast will remember that place. Don't know if you ever went there, but yeah, it's pretty wild. But
it doesn't ring any bells.
I think you would have probably DJ'd there back in the day.
Probably at some point. We played at a couple of places, yeah.
Yeah. And there was a resident DJ there. He was like a hip hop scratch DJ, Lavi, his name was. If you're listening, Lavi, shout out, mate. He said, "Oh man, you got to hear this." Because this is when the electro stuff was coming in.
Yep.
And he gave me a copy of Flaunt It, and I remember listening to it, thinking, "Oh man, this is pretty banging. I wonder if it works." And I just remember playing it one week and it went really well, and then the next week I played it and it was like more popular, and then every week it just was getting more and more of a reaction, and I thought, shit, man, this thing's going to be huge. And then yeah.
Well, we tried to, so we finished it up. The short story, which is not a short story, it's never a short story with me. We had a deep house version. It started out as a late night deep record, and I wanted to get a dark vocal on it. I'd listened to, some of the American tribal records had really kind of moody late night vocals. And I said to Grant, "Do you know anybody who can do a kind of dark, late night rap or something on this, or a spoken word vocal?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I actually saw a guy in a band." And so we contacted this Shawnee B, and he came out to my place, and he had a whole folder of different snippet vocals. And I said, "Let's cut these bits out here, and it's just my floor, you're dancing on it," and all this kind of stuff that he had. Mate, Shawnee, wow, some of the lyrics he had were genius. And I was like, it was like we sort of handpicked the best stuff that he'd written, because he was doing a few gigs with a live dance music act. And so he was using a lot of these live lyrics as part of his show. So we cherry picked the best of it, recorded the vocal, and it sounded amazing. I was like, this guy sounds fantastic. But I felt like we needed a more electro version. I thought, you know what, it's quite deep. Maybe, and everybody else was like, no, this is kind of cool. Let me just have a go at, this is right around the time when some of that more buzzy electro stuff was quite popular. The big track that we were playing at the time was a record called I See Girls by Tom Neville.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we went in that direction with it, and everybody was like, that's actually kind of cool. That could really work. So we played it to a few labels, and people were like, "Nah, we're not sure about it. It's a bit weird. The vocal, I don't know, is going to work." Nah. So people said no. Played it to Sony, and they said no, and everyone said no. So Grant said, right, I'm going to give it to the guys at Nova. He was working at Nova Radio at the time, and they had a thing they were doing called a crash test, which is where they'd play a record, a random track that they thought they might like. They played it in the middle of the afternoon and see what happened. So they played Flaunt It one afternoon, and the phones lit up. I went, okay, that went well. Let's play it again. So they played it the next day, same thing. So then they said to us, all right, we're going to put it on our nighttime show, because back in those days, both radio stations, the big stations in Melbourne were Nova and Fox. They had a nighttime chart show. I think it was called the Nova 19s. So they played the track, and it got raves, and so it started to kind of creep up the Nova 19s chart. We still didn't have a record deal or a film clip or anything for it. So then we self-funded the...
Oh, so it's unsigned at this point.
Unsigned. We self-funded a film clip, the world's worst film clip you've ever seen. It was funny. It was funny because it was so bad, but Grant got a bunch of models and us just basically standing in a little studio somewhere down in Richmond. I think the film clip cost us about $200, but we did it. And then it literally got to a point where a friend of mine at Sony, a great guy, Simon Cahill, he went to the boss of Sony at the time, Dennis Hanlon, and said, Dennis, we've got to sign this record. It's going to be a hit. And Dennis looked at the charts and went, yep, okay, let's do it. So he signed it. And then the rest is history, mate. It went to number one. And it stayed there for 7 weeks. It was a huge record. And I think at the time, you never think your record's going to be a hit. You just make a record to play. And I remember the first time I heard it come up on radio, and I said to my wife at the time, I said, you know what, Fee, this is going to be a big record because it just doesn't sound like anything else on radio. And the fact that radio would even play a record like that is, at the time,
sign of the times.
Okay.
Hey,
it was quite unusual. But anyway, they played it, and it blew up, and off we went.
Man, Grant sounds like he's the sort of guy who could just pull in favors from.
Oh yeah, he's a stuntman.
Knows everyone.
He's the best at it.
Yeah,
he's a total gadabout town. And I think, to be fair, I made the records, but he made the success with some of his contacts and everything else. he really did tip that record over for us. He was the guy that got it in the hands of Nova, because without him, they probably wouldn't have even heard the track. So, because he was doing the Saturday night radio show at the time, Nova Nation with John Corse, and so that helped. And then I think eventually getting Sony involved, they then got it played. They then got it on the Austereo network, which was 2Day FM and Fox and all that, and that just blew it up. The record just went from big to huge at that moment. And we were very fortunate. We had a lot of good people around us at the time that helped to break it. But yeah, Grant's always been good. He's very much he likes to work. He's a good networker. Probably one of the best I've ever seen. He can sit in a room with people and connect and do things, and he helped us get a lot of opportunities back in the early days, which was good for us. He looked after that side of things, and that was important for us because I've never been much for connecting with people and doing the kind of cocktail party thing, which is what Grant's always been really good at. So that helped us a lot, no question about it.
Man, I interviewed Johnny from the Pot Bellies, and he said one thing that stuck with me. I remember I was telling my wife after it. He said, this industry is just one massive networking business. Like, you just got to meet people, shake hands.
It helps.
And then that just leads to one thing, which leads to another. And I don't think people do enough of that these days because, everything's so easy. You can just send emails and...
Yeah. You can hang out. I think it's one of the things that I've learned. I reckon you get more done over a handshake at a bar somewhere than you do back and forth on emails. Yeah. My manager, actually, Smillie, who's another Smillie, different Smillie, but Smillie, one of the things that he does, which I always took on board, is he makes the phone call. No email, no text back and forth. He doesn't like playing texting tennis. He'll just ring somebody direct. Hey, mate, can you do this for me? And he gets stuff done. And I think that's also a key ingredient as well, is connecting with people and then ringing them, actually having a voice on the other end of the phone. Hey, mate, how you going? Let's do this deal. I think that's an important and vital ingredient as well. But obviously connections, and that's something we did a lot of. We worked with a lot of clubs, and we traveled all over the country at one point and overseas. and you meet the right people. And, we got to hang out and become friends with the Swedish House Mafia guys. And, I got to sit in the studio with Armin van Buren and work on records and stuff like that. You get to connect with the right people. And I think that the face-to-face connection is a big part of it for sure.
Yeah,
Johnny's
yeah.
definitely right there.
So, I mean, I remember from that era, like TV Rock, you were gigging. This is kind of like when I started sort of getting right into the internet, so you could sort of watch what your favorite DJs and stuff were doing. But you were gigging all over the country, playing all the festivals,
We
doing
did a
all
lot of
like
stuff.
big, huge nightclub shows at like Family, Monastery in Brisbane. I'm just speaking of Brisbane because that's where I'm from, but like you got to work with some of the biggest. Like you've had a great relationship with Axwell.
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah, Axe has been a big supporter of my stuff.
yeah, so when just this is like for me. I mean, you don't talk figures or anything, but like when you make a big record like Flaunt It, is it life changing money, or is it more that it
No.
leads on
No,
to
no.
the
No, it's good
gigs?
money, but it's not life-changing. No. I think life-changing for most people comes from the touring. That's where the big
Right.
money is these days, and it was even true back then. I think right around that time, I think everything really changed when the illegal downloading started, and that took a lot of money. It's one of the reasons why we closed Zero Tolerance at the time, because we
Yeah,
were just, in the early days, we were selling 1,500 vinyls. So you could make 10K off a record
yeah,
back in those days. That all disappeared. All of a sudden, we were selling 300 vinyls, and most of it was disappearing in illegal downloads and stuff.
yeah,
So pretty quickly, yeah, I think that most of the artists that I've worked with over the years, the really good money, it's the touring. You look at someone like Timmy Trumpet, who I worked with, and the amount of money he's charging per show. I don't know what he gets these days, but it's probably $250,000 or something for a show. I mean, that's and you can make that across the European summer. You can make that money 4 or 5 nights a week. It's ridiculous. Flying
crazy.
around in private jets, that's where the big money is. There's not much money in music sales unless if you get one of those, 100 million plus streaming records, then you can start to make some decent coin.
Yeah,
I think a billion streaming tracks worth about $4 million on Spotify. So, and that's pretty good, but it's hard to get to that level.
yeah, yeah. Have to be
I've had a
like,
couple, but they're hard to get.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, that's where the big money is. It's all in touring.
Yeah, I mean, well, you were doing all the festival circuits and the nightclubs, so like I'm sure you were killing it in that time period. But do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the big remixes, like like In My Mind, In the Air? Oh, there's so many. Like I was looking up your some of the big tunes you've been involved in before we were doing the podcast, and there's so many tracks that you were involved in that I just didn't have any idea. Like you just
Yeah, I
didn't
don't talk a lot about it. I'm not very good at banging on my own drum, but I've done a lot of behind the scenes work on some
on
stuff.
huge records.
We
Yeah,
worked with, well, initially it was, obviously Flaunt It. The Others was quite big for us. Then we had the couple of records with Axe, been a long time. In the Air was a big one. Axwell took our version and just turned it into I mean, Axe is just, the man's a bloody genius, mate, in the
yeah,
studio. I've got to say this, Axe is the nicest guy on the planet. He's really easy to work with and stuff. I saw him a few weeks back at the Ultra Festival when he was down here. And, it was like, old friends caught up we were talking about our kids and life outside of the business. And so to have somebody like Axe in your corner is a big thing. He was a great guy, easy to work with, and really a big supporter of us. And he reached out. I remember we long story short, we went to Amsterdam and we contacted Laid Back Luke, who I knew. And we said, listen, we're going to be in Amsterdam. Do you want to work on a record? And we were building a bit of traction. He's like, yeah, man, come out to my place. So we went out to his place and we worked on this record. And that night in Amsterdam, Luke had a gig on. He said, I'm playing a gig tonight. He had this gig that he did once a year for a friend of his for almost no money. He said, because this is the guy who discovered me and gave me a lot of opportunities in the early days. So I play for this guy once a year for a bargain price. And so we went into central Amsterdam and he played the record. The other bit of interesting news was that his warm-up DJ that night was Afrojack, who went on
oh,
to do huge things. Anyway, so he plays the record, and then we were back at my place a few weeks later working on it. And it was towards the end of the year, and I remember we were having a conversation with Axe, and Axwell said, "I'm looking for a record to take to the Miami Music Conference in March. Have you got anything?" And so we played him In the Air that we were working on, and he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "I really like this. The vocal's great, and the chords are fantastic." He said, "Send me the bits." So we sent him the parts, and a few weeks later, he started playing the record. We didn't even hear it. We saw him playing it live before he actually uh, gave us a copy to listen to. But he took that record and turned it into an anthem. And then, not long after that, I started to work on In My Mind. Which actually, when I say not long after that, it was probably 2011. I started working on that a couple of years later. But the relationship I had with Axwell was certainly a big part of my career at that time, and he was a big supporter. I mean, the good thing about Axe is once you're in with him, he's friends for life, and he's always on the lookout. What do you got next? I could still send him a track today, and he'll listen to it for me and give me feedback and tell me what he thinks of it, stuff like that. So having him in our corner, we met him because we played for some guys in Melbourne, and it was Grant, and I think John was involved in running it. It was called Our House, or anyway, they were the first people to book Axwell in Melbourne. This is before the Swedish House Mafia. This is like 2005, and when he came to Melbourne, me and Grant, we took him out to dinner and took him to the show and kind of hung out with him. This is a couple of years before he started to really break. And so we became firm friends with him before he was famous.
Yeah.
So by the time he started to, by 2006 when he started to become huge, we were already good friends with him. So that helped a lot along the way. And he was a big supporter of mine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything he touches turns to gold, eh? Like,
he's a talented man, that's for sure.
So many. I remember like vividly that period where that Swedish sound came in and just going, oh man, I just love this music. Like it was just a different style of house music. I remember there was like a Mixmag CD that came out. That was the first time I'd heard it. I think it might have been mixed by Axwell and Ingrosso.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, I was like, oh man, this is so cool. This is where it like that. Yeah, that was still when I was buying vinyl. So
we saw him play. I think it was 2000. He played at the Future Music Festival, or it might have been Creamfields, or one of the local festival brands. And he was the second last act. So they had Axwell second last, and Bob Sinclair. Bob Sinclair finished. He closed out the stage, and we stood there for Axwell's set because we were obviously pretty good mates with him by this stage, and we stood up on the side stage while he played, and mate, he just owned it. He was right from the outset. He was absolutely on point, and I can still remember it as one. That was kind of like the first time I heard a DJ really put together one of those, I guess what you'd call EDM.
Yeah.
It was not house music. It wasn't techno. It was somewhere in between. And it was just, mate, he owned it. And I remember standing there, we saw Bob Sinclair play afterwards, and Bob didn't have a chance against him. Axwell just tore it up. He was so good. I mean, Bob did a good job, but Axwell just, mate, he blew the roof off the joint. And that was, I guess, around the time when we all started to kind of look at, okay, let's get into this lane a bit more. So the music up until that point, we were a bit more housey. Then from then onwards, we started to get more, I guess, clubby, for want of a better description, more EDM, if you like.
Yeah.
And his records at the time, it started with In the Air and his mix of Sweet Disposition. Then it was the Swedish House Mafia record One. That whole kind of era really, I guess, directed where everybody was going, and pretty much most of the world's producers in that line started making records like that because of what they were doing, because of what Axwell and Ingrosso and Angelo and that were doing. That's where everybody wanted to be.
Yeah,
it's fantastic. It's a good time.
In that time, like when you were the height of the TV rock era, you must have played some like amazing shows and festivals. Like, is there any like shows that stand out in your memory that you can tell us a bit about?
There's a couple. I mean, we played some really big shows. The one that I reckon was the best I ever played was actually without Grant. He was unable to be there. I can't remember what. It was 2011. I was in Mykonos, and I went to the club. It was the Paradise Beach Club. We played every year. from 2006 to 2014, and it was 2011, and it was one of those clubs, like a lot of those European joints, didn't open until 1, didn't get busy until 2:30, and then people stayed through till 7 or 8:30. And I remember I arrived at the club at 2:30, and the guy that ran the club, Thomas, said to me, whenever you're ready, let's go. I said, all right, let's go now. I'll go straight away. And I just came on. It was about 2:45, and I played through till, I don't know, 8 o'clock or something like that. And the whole place was lit up the whole night. It was, I don't know, it was just one of those nights where the crowd was just standing right at the front of the stage, hands in the air the whole time. I think it was the time, In the Air was a big record. I had lots of fresh records and bootlegs and all sorts of stuff. And it just, man, it went off. So that was a big one. Brazil, I played in Brazil a lot, and a couple of times one time I played in front of 18,000 people. But there was one gig I played in Brazil that was quite a standout one. It was in the middle of nowhere. I flew out to this gig. I had to take 3 flights, and supposedly I had a private jet for the last flight. The private jet was this little one prop. It was a terrible plane, and we flew straight through the middle of a storm. So on my way to the gig, I'm trying to key my will into the phone, like I'm thinking, this is it, mate. I'm going down, because we were flying right through the middle of a storm. It was lightning all around us and stuff. Anyway, fortunately, we made a safe landing, and I played this gig, and I think because I was out in the middle of nowhere, I think the crowd was really enthusiastic about the fact that I'd made the journey, because a lot of DJs probably wouldn't have gone out there.
Yeah.
So I played the gig, and it was probably, I don't know, maybe 2,500, 3,000 people there, but it was just a really good room. I came on, and they were just excited and lit up the whole time. And afterwards, it was, I was buzzing walking off the stage. I was like, wow, that was pretty cool. So yeah, a couple of good gigs. I mean,
Then you had to get on that bloody plane to get out of there, though.
Yeah, it was a bit scary. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't my favourite flight, that's for sure. I mean, I've been a pretty good flyer, but that was, flying through the middle of a storm, rain all around us, and wearing this little, bouncing around in the wind and stuff like that. The pilot didn't seem to be bothered by it, but
my worst nightmare.
But we also played in Russia. That was an interesting gig. We played out at a place called Nizhny, which was out in the middle of, I actually don't know where it is. I need to look it up on a map, but it was out in the middle of nowhere in Russia, that was a pretty good gig. Interesting gig in Russia, because Russian gigs are always interesting. There's a lot of pretty heavy looking guys out the back. I think there was a lot of I was told that some of these guys were Albanian mafia, apparently. So not exactly sure where they were all from, but yeah, that was a really good gig. There were guys there and girls there that had TV Rock T-shirts made up and all that sort of stuff. So it was
wow,
a fascinating show. But yeah, it was just good. It was interesting. Traveling the world is it's not for everyone. It's one of the reasons I don't do gigs much anymore. It's just, I'm not really up for it these days. But it is a hard life. I met a lot of people along the way who obviously have had a big career doing it. People like Van Buren and Tiesto and all that sort of stuff. And it's hard. It's hard. I was talking to Carl Cox one night about life on the road. It's one of the reasons why he's never gotten married. Is it's just not the right. Having a wife and kids just wouldn't work. So and I do. I've got a wife and kids, so I tended to. That's one of the reasons why I backed off a bit a few years ago. But yeah, it's fun and exciting, but it is a challenge, and it's also a challenge too. Being in Australia, it's a long way to get to anywhere.
Yeah.
If you're based in Europe or America, everything's a lot closer.
Yeah, it's like we used to promote loads of gigs back in the day, and it was like when we started getting, because we would always kind of get the like underground sort of guys who hadn't kind of broken through yet, that were just touring through Australia, and they'd be here for, I don't know, 2 weeks, and the like agent would have booked them in as many gigs as possible, squeezing as many in, and it was only after a while of seeing these guys and how knackered they were, and how it's just a horrible lifestyle that just put me off doing it. I was like, man.
If you want to, I guess the worst example is probably Avicii. I mean, the lifestyle just really does. It'll drill you down. I mean, you have to have a healthy respect for alcohol and drugs and smoking and all the stuff that goes along with, this business, particularly the alcohol and drugs. It can be a big issue. I drank a lot when I was DJing, and I really, a couple of times I went, you know what, this is getting a little bit out of control here. I got to stop. I was never one for drugs, never have been. I mean, I suppose I'm not going to lie and say that I didn't touch anything. I have partied over the years, but I always had a healthy respect for the business, and what I was trying to do. And I suppose in the early days, in the 90s, Melbourne, everybody was taking E and partying most weekends. I didn't really party that hard because I wanted to get in the studio,
Yeah.
and I thought if I'm cooked until Tuesday, I don't. That's not going to help. So, excuse me, I always had a respect for it, but a lot of guys didn't. And you do see people who fall off the wagon, and unfortunately, Tim was one of those guys who just, the lifestyle got the better of him. He had a real problem with the booze, and it was a shame because, boy, was he a talented guy. But unfortunately, that can happen in this industry sometimes.
Yeah, mate.
It's one of the downsides of the music biz.
Alcohol's a killer, isn't it? It really is.
It is.
Like one
But
of the
I have a
drugs.
respect for it nowadays. I love a glass of wine from time to time, but like everybody else, I have a couple of drinks and that's it. I don't party like I used to. I can't. My body's not up to it. So I'm not interested.
Fucking bedridden for a week.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You know what you're going to feel
Yeah.
like the next day. So you're like, I don't know if I want to feel like that the next day.
Yeah. So, mate, what are you up to at the moment? Like, I mean, we didn't really talk about how TV Rock kind of ended. Like, how did that end? It just
I think
slowly simmer down.
No, nothing. Yeah, there was nothing. No malice in it or anything like that. Grant was busy at the time. Grant was starting to run restaurants and do other things. I could see he was interested in moving in new directions. It was we'd done in my mind, which was a track that I did myself with Phoenix Paul, and so at the time it was just. I guess it made sense for us to say, and I remember we sat down in a meeting one day and said, look, you know what, you're busy, you're doing other things. Let's just call it quits. We've had a good run. And we did. We just said, you know what, enough. Since then, we've done a few reform shows. He's doing a TV Rock show at, I think it's Beyond the Valley this year. I can't be there, I'm away, but long story short, I don't really DJ much anymore. It's not really my thing. But yeah, it was just kind of felt like the right time. And I wanted to start spending more time working with new artists. And that's when I started working with Timmy Trumpet and doing stuff with the Nervo Girls and a few other people. And I was interested in moving in new directions as well. So it made sense at the time,
Awesome.
And then, so more recently now where I'm involved with a label, we started a new label last year called Resound Records. It's with Smillie, my manager, and a couple of guys, Tom Evans, who's a very well-respected and producer DJ from Melbourne, and Carl, a guy who was involved with us at Neon Records. He's come across to work with us. And we're basically working with new artists, looking for the next generation of talent. So I spend a lot of time in my studio here, working with people on new tracks with them and stuff like that. Most of the guys I'm working with, a good friend of mine, Piero. He comes to the studio once a week and we're working on tracks for him. I'm working with Cooper Smith, who is a local DJ who is he deals with cerebral palsy, but he's an absolute, his brain is 100% functional. It's just that the messages don't get to his body in quite the same way they do for other people. But he is an absolute gun. So we're happily working on records with him and looking for the next generation of talent. Just looking for anybody maybe who's making records that we can help to finish off. One of the things I like to do is find people who are already making music and just need a bit of help to finish them off and get them to a professional standard. And so that's where I come in. And yeah, we've been doing that for 18 months, and we're breaking through with some of the records we've got at the moment. We'll be continuing to do that for the foreseeable future. That's my plan. Keep making records for the next generation of artists.
Oh, awesome. And I mean, with your experience and connections, it's no-brainer. Someone wants to work with you.
It helps to have a long history, yeah, because one of the things that I'm good at is figuring out how to give records a bit of an identity. I did it with, when I worked on In My Mind with the Phoenix Paul guys. They had written the record and stuff, but they were kind of stuck in a rut with it and not sure how to finish it. So that's one of the things that I guess I've always been pretty good at, is taking somebody's half-finished idea and finishing it with them and helping them to get it to hopefully a professional standard.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I didn't realize, but you you were involved in Freaks, the Timmy Trumpet track. There's so many. Medusa, you've done.
We did Freaks at the time. So I'd worked with Timmy, and he was a guy that he'd been on the Ministry of Sound tour with us and stuff. He was a great guy, and we'd worked on a couple of tracks. I did a record for him called Snapback. And yeah, he came to us with this idea and I brought in a friend of mine, Jeremy Jebu, who I was producing with at the time, who was pretty big, young producer, really, really down with the kind of, I guess, the current sound, which at the time in Melbourne was called Melbourne Bounce. It was quite a big thing down here. And Timmy had expressed a bit of interest in moving his track in this direction, in the sort of with the Melbourne Bounce kind of bass line and all that sort of stuff. And I said, look, I'm going to bring this friend of mine, Jeremy, in on the session. He knows that music really well. And so together, we crafted the first version of the track. And I went looking for a couple of old plugins. So the main riff that you hear on that, which sounds like a weird vocalist singing the da 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 vocal, that was an old plugin that I knew about from 15 years ago. And so I said to Jeremy, right, let's find this plugin and load it up. I think we can make a unique sound. So I managed to kind of, I guess, bring a couple of unique sounds to the record that helped to give it a bit of an identity. And Jeremy's production with the drop and everything was on point. So we put it out and started to get a bit of traction. And we were like, okay, this record's starting to go all right. And then when they put the vocal on it, the New Zealand rapper Savage chucked his vocal on top. All of a sudden, it became this monster, and I couldn't believe it. It just blew up. And then next thing you know, Timmy's DJing all across Europe, and people are waiting for him at the airport with trumpets when he gets off the plane. And it was like Beatlemania or something. It was crazy. Absolutely crazy. And then there was the famous viral video with the guy and his son where he's banging on the oven door and Timmy runs in and the whole thing was a bit surreal. But it's sort of like what happened with Flaunt It. It just, you make a record, you think, yeah, this could do all right. And I could still remember, at the time we thought, oh, yeah, maybe this record will go okay. I don't know, we just passed 1 billion streams not long ago. So unbelievable. And I really didn't expect that it would do that. So then I stayed working with Timmy at the time. We did 3 or 4 other records for him, Oracle and Toka, Party Till We Die, Deja Vu, a couple others. And then my friend Jeremy, he stayed on working with Timmy full time for a couple of years after that. So yeah, it was a good relationship, and we were pretty grateful to be part of it, to be honest. It was a great record and really exceeded all of our expectations.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And you never think a record's going to be big. In fact, you know what happens? It's always the opposite. You think something's this is going to blow up, and it doesn't connect.
Nothing.
It does nothing. When I worked with Andy J on a record called This Feeling, and everybody was like, this is going to be huge. And it came out and it fizzled. It did nothing. And we were like, okay, it's not connecting. But whereas, tracks like Freaks, I thought, this could maybe, I don't know, maybe a few DJs will play it. It's a Melbourne Bounce kind of style record. That seems to be popular, but it just went bang and took off. So I think that's probably the one thing that I've always been good at is perhaps if I was to describe it, it's unlocking a record's potential.
Yeah, okay.
Somehow. I don't know how I do it, but it seems it's almost like I sort of I guess I'm the professional version of a fan. So if I like your track, I say to myself, how do I want to hear this? What do I want? And what can I put in this record that is going to get it noticed? Because I know I said this earlier, but it's so true. If a DJ plays a set of music and my record's one of the tracks in that set, I want people, when they walk out, asking about the record, my record. What was that track? When we did In My Mind, I can still remember in my mind the first time Axwell played it, somebody posted a YouTube video saying something like, did anybody know what this record is? And there was just literally hundreds of people going, I think it could be the new Dirty South, might be Axwell and Ingrosso's new record. It could be Ivan Gough, who knows? Even my name was dropped once or twice. And it was just talked about straight away that within the next 2 or 3 days, Axe played a set with a couple of new tracks and my one was the one that everybody talked about. And I think that's what I always try and do. I always try to find that little bit of something that'll help a record stand out. And it's not easy because everything's been done. So you have to ask yourself, okay, what can I do? Maybe I put a big drop that's got a strange sound in it. Maybe I do a bit where the record slows down or speeds up. Anything, a little strange vocal thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that you talked about the Medusa Piece of Your Heart record, which I did a remix of. The bit in the middle where the guy says, "What? Hang on, stop," or something. He makes some little offhand comment in the middle. It's like a little studio mistake that they snuck in there, and it just gave the record an identity.
Yeah.
Another one of my favourite records from the last couple of years, really clever track, was that "Afraid to Feel" by LF System, big UK hit, and it starts off slow. It starts off at about, I don't know, it sounds like about 115 BPM, and then it drops in at 125 house music tempo. It's one of those records that goes, whoa, and you notice
Yeah.
it straight away, you know. And I think if it's something that I try and do with young producers is just get them to start thinking about how can you make your record stand out. It's so important. You know, it's really hard because I know Thomas Bangalter said it a while ago. He said it's really hard sometimes to tell whose record's whose anymore.
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
hear a Daft Punk track, you know it's Daft Punk. When you hear Dead Mouse, you know it's Dead Mouse. When you hear Eric Prydz, you know an Eric Prydz record when you hear it, you know? Well, certainly if somebody goes, that's an Eric Prydz track, you go, oh yeah, of course. Whereas today, a lot of stuff that DJs are playing sounds very similar. And I think it's hard to break through when you don't stand out.
Yeah, totally. Just touching on the thing about what's going to be huge and what's not. I interviewed Tool Paul when he was in Brisbane last year,
Legend.
and yeah, and he said, like, man, I've poured my heart and soul into a record, and I swear it's going to be like, you know, the greatest thing ever. And then I play it out, and it just doesn't connect. And then he said, then one night I'm in the studio and I just hit two notes, and then like whack it together, get it cut, and then it blows up to be like,
Yeah.
you know, Commisera, let me show you. And he's like,
Yeah.
he said, I put literally like no effort into that, didn't really try at all. And it just blew up.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think one of the things that often makes a great record is something when you work on it quickly. If you can get 80% of the record done in 10% of the time, because that's kind of how it works for me. If I'm on a heater, if I've got a good idea and it goes quickly, I can get so much of the record done, and then it's just arranging and finessing and fiddling around.
Yeah.
But yeah, that happens a lot. You put time into records, you think this is going to blow up, and it doesn't. Sometimes you'll work on a record, do 5 different versions, and then all of a sudden you'll hit on something one night where you say a sample, 2 notes, something, and you go, "That's what I've been looking for the whole time." Sometimes I'll work for 8 hours in the studio and just give up. "Oh, fuck this," and pardon my French, and you walk out the door and that's it, I'm done. Right? I'm still crap. And then the next day you come in and you'll spend 15 minutes on something and go, "Oh, that was what I was looking for the whole time." You know, it's just,
Being a creative person, that's just, yeah, nightmare.
and you still have doubt. I mean, self-doubt's something that creeps in too when you're having a bad day. I was talking to Axwell about this a couple of months back when I said I went to the Ultra Festival when he played, and he calls it, Axwell's got this thing he calls it imposter syndrome, which is
Yeah.
is basically people are going to figure out one day that I'm no good. You know, they're going to
Yeah.
think that I've been tricking them the whole time and stuff. And I said to him, I go, dude, if there's anybody out there that nobody has to worry about your
It's not
talent,
you.
it's not
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Your track record's pretty solid, mate. I don't think you've got too much to worry about. But it is hard sometimes, you know. And of course, with the internet stuff, you know, you get a lot of critics and people who tell you you're no good sometimes. So it does wear you down. But it is sometimes, you know, sometimes you do have to give up on a track after a certain period of time and go, it's not going to work. But then sometimes you do that. Sometimes you'll get in the studio, put up a sample, and all of a sudden the whole record just appears in front of you. It's like that sample just unlocks everything, you know? Sometimes you'll go to see a DJ play and you'll come back from the studio, come back the next day to the studio and go, right, and all the music you heard the night before is still playing around in your head and you just get ideas. And I think that's an important thing to do too for a lot of DJs. A lot of producers, I say, you know, go and listen to a DJ mix from 1995 or
Yeah.
2003. You know, go and find a set that's 15 or 20. Don't listen to music that was being played last week. Go and find a DJ set from way back, and you might be just all of a sudden you'll get an idea from something and go, hey, you know what? That's kind of cool. No one's doing anything like that today. I think that's a vital ingredient to helping to kind of find an identity you know, is looking back over, trying to increase your chances of coming up with a good idea. And I guess
Well,
it's, you know,
that's like makes so much sense because everything seems to come in like cycles.
yeah,
It's like, well, if you think about it, really, if history repeats itself, the next cycle that comes through is going to be electro house.
Mm.
You
Yep.
know, like it's
I've got a
inevitable
record in
that'll
that
happen.
lane that I've done. I've actually done a record that we are currently we're looking at a couple of overseas artists who are interested in taking it and doing a bit of work on it and putting it out. But yeah, I felt that a while ago. I was like, you know what, it's time for something else. But I mean, look, there's so much music coming out all the time at the moment. It's hard, you know. If I went looking for electro records, I could find a few that were released last week. They're
Yeah,
out there.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it is difficult. I think it gets harder and harder. You know, when we started out in this business in '88, when house music started to break through, there was new stuff coming every week that was different. You don't hear that anymore. There's not a lot of stuff that hasn't been done. So it is harder to stand out, especially when there's hundreds of thousands of records going up on Spotify every week. It is harder. But I think if you are looking outside the box, instead of, like I said, instead of listening to a DJ mix from last week, but instead, go and find one from 15 years ago, you've probably got a better chance of maybe finding something that is not popular right now and could be.
Yeah, exactly.
Finding something that might, you know what, no one's made a record like that in a long time, and off you go. That's what happens. That's how records break out. I remember when everybody was playing pretty banging, and all of a sudden along comes "Piece of Your Heart" by Medusa, which is a deep house track with a dark vocal on it, and it pointed to a whole new direction. That happens. When Camel Fat put out "Cola," what a record! Got played on commercial radio. It's a late night club track, but it was so different and interesting and new and fresh.
Yeah.
Elderbrook on the vocal, who's an unbelievably talented vocalist. The whole thing just, all of a sudden, everybody spins off in a new direction. So, yeah, I think that's you can definitely increase your chances of finding something fresh. It's a bit easier for me because I've got a history of producing records for 35 years now, so I can dig back through old samples and old sounds. I've got sounds that I collected from the 90s and stuff which I can bring out. But for the new producers, it is a little bit more difficult to find something unique and different because all they've got is what they heard last week,
Yeah,
It does make it a bit harder. But yeah. If you look backwards a bit further, you can sometimes find things that maybe will increase your chances of coming up with something fresh.
Yeah. I mean, well, like I went to the Hernan gig in Brisbane, was it Friday night? And that blew me away. Like I know that the progressive scene is like it's like, I think that Balance Festival has kind of really pushed it into the limelight again.
Yep.
But like I just couldn't believe how many people were at this gig in Brisbane for a progressive house night.
Back on again, and I've noticed we went to see, like, my wife's a big fan of the Anjana Deep guys. Ben Boma, we went to see Ben Boma live not long ago, and a lot of subcontinent, a lot of Pakistanis and Sri Lankans and Indian crew there, which was quite surprising to me. And they were loving it, like really into it and stuff, as well as the usual suspects of, I guess the Caucasian Australian guys as well. But it's definitely got a vibe on it at the moment. I mean, I listen to the Anjana Deep podcasts nearly every week and stuff. I know a lot of the Anjana Deep guys. And yeah, it's definitely the whole progressive scene. And I mean, the Balance guys, they are the absolute stand-up, kings of the progressive scene in Australia and also worldwide just about at the moment. They really do. They come from the same era. One of the guys, Tom Panzik's a good friend of mine, and they come from that 90s progressive era, and they've stayed with it. They've supported it through thick and thin. They're obviously their Balance podcasts and that are really good. The mixes they put out, all the mixes they've dropped after the festival.
Yeah.
From Balance Croatia, there's been some fantastic mixes in amongst all that. Yeah, they really are big supporters of that sound, and it's definitely back on again at the moment. That's for sure.
Good. Not interesting. I've been listening to a few of your new productions, kind of progressive-y. Not something.
Yeah, no, I'm doing some stuff with Zero Tolerance and that at the moment. So I've got some more late night clubby sort of stuff coming. Yeah, I do a bit of everything, but the progressive sound is, I mean, for me, the music that speaks to me the most is still the progressive melodic stuff. But I'm a massive fan of. I listen to Maceo Plex, Solomon. I love listening to Stefan Bodzen, who plays a bit live on his gear. Hannes Bieger, who also plays live keyboards with his DJ sets. He's just fantastic. And I love, Jody Wisternoff and all of those Anjana Deep guys and stuff. I know Jody, met him a few times, and he's always looking for something else to push, and it's always melodic and interesting. And I love my breaks. My progressive breaks is probably very close to my heart. I've made a lot of progressive breaks records over the years. It was a sound that we sort of pushed in the late 90s down here, which no one else was doing at the time. So yeah, that's still my first love. The progressive sound is still my first love, but I like stuff that's progressive, but also a little bit tougher at times, a little bit more tech progressive, if you like, One of the things I like about Solomon and Maceo is they their sets are kind of a little bit progressive, a little bit housey, a little bit melodic, a little bit trancey. They're sort of a little bit everything, but they're tough when they need to be as well. And that's my thing. Yeah. Yep. Still a prog kid for sure.
Yeah, same here. I still buy loads of records. I think that's the best way to find decent
No,
music.
you're the guy, right?
Because it's like I buy it from record. I'm digging in record shops, but I buy a lot of stuff from Juno, and that you don't I'd say a large percentage of the stuff that gets released every week on vinyl is all really good. Just filters out so much shit.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoy. I'm not interested in becoming a nightclub DJ anymore. But I just like DJing at home.
Well, there's a lot of DJs still playing it. I mean, I think Sven Bath still plays all vinyl.
Yeah,
He said, and he's particular about that. If he's got a track that he likes, I imagine he probably cuts it to acetate himself if he can't actually buy it on vinyl. And there's something to be said for that. I mean, I don't miss the vinyl days myself. I loved playing on vinyl for a long time, but I don't miss the jumping needles and the scratched records and all the crap that went along, having needles sliding across the vinyl from time to time and stuff when you got a bit too much dust underneath. But at the same time, it was a fun time to play. I just don't miss carrying record boxes around. That was the hard part. Nowadays, I can show up to a gig with a pair of headphones and a USB stick, and I'm off.
Yeah.
I like that. I like the convenience.
Yeah, definitely.
But we played vinyl for a long time. Long time. I used to show up to gigs in Melbourne with 5 or 6 boxes of records and have to carry them up 2 flights of stairs to get into the clubs and stuff like that. Yeah, don't miss those days.
Have you still got any of them?
Yeah, I got a few. I got a few of the old rave records from that late 80s, early 90s kind of era, bits and pieces. I've got probably 30 or 40 of my own records that are there, but yeah, they sit in a cupboard somewhere. I never pull them out. So
cool. Oh mate, I've got a few rapid fire questions for you.
Yeah, go on, shoot.
All right. Favorite synth or plugin?
Ooh, wow. Oh, look, I've got a Moog Subsequent 37 sitting here. I love them. I love I like my plugins, Serum and a few others. There's really good plugins, but I love the synth where you've got a knob to adjust so you can tweak things. I still miss that a lot with plugins. That's one of the things we did heaps back in the old days. So yeah, the Moog Subsequent 37 is a great little unit. Sounds amazing.
Unreal. One collab you'd still love to do?
Oh boy, that's a tough one.
Them all.
Look, if I could get in the studio, there's one guy that he never does collabs. He never will. But Eric Prydz to me is king. I love Eric's sound. I'd love to just sit back and watch him produce a record and see how he does it. Because he's got a way about doing things. So Eric Prydz would be the guy that I would absolutely love to just sit in and watch.
Surprised you can't hook that up.
Oh no, he doesn't. I've met Eric a couple of times. Lovely guy, but he's a renegade. He does his own thing. He doesn't need anyone else.
Yeah, true. He's like a bloody genius.
He is.
Most underrated Aussie DJ or producer?
Oh, there's quite a few. My good mate Marcus Santoro. I love Marcus. He's starting to break through finally. He's had some great records over the years. Marcus is one of the guys signed to our label. He's in that sort of deep house / semi-afro kind of lane at the moment. He's a great producer and he deserves to break through.
Oh, that's good. A track you wish you'd made?
Ooh, Dark and Long by Underworld.
Oh.
It is the gold standard for me. I love that record. Cannot tire of it. It is just, Dark and Long to me sits right at the very top. It's just it is everything that I love about progressive and club music, and the vocal is just random shouting and stuff. It's Dark and Long, Underworld.
Have you heard that new? There's like I think she's a British pop star.
Pink Pantheress.
Yeah. I like that track, eh?
The funny thing is, I actually don't dislike it. I heard it and I went, and then I went, you know what? I actually don't dislike this. I think she's used the sample clever. My daughter is a fan of Dark and Long because I've force fed it to her many times, and she said I was walking past this shop the other day and I heard Underworld's track, but it's on a pop record or something. I said, yeah, Pink Pantheress, and I don't hate it. It's not something I'd listen to, but yeah, I don't hate what she's done. I think the fact that she's paying tribute to some absolute UK classics is kind of nice, even though it's not what I listen to.
That's the way I look at it. I think, she's obviously, maybe she had nothing to do with it. I don't know, but she's obviously got some kind of music history there.
Absolutely.
Because I played that. My kids loved that song, and I had to explain to them like, no, this is a really old track. Like, and then I'll play them the old version, but they're not interested. They're like, yeah, whatever.
No, my daughter likes a lot of the same music as me, and she's heard Duck and Long quite a bit, so she's gotten into it now.
Oh, cool. Festival or club? What do you prefer?
Oh, club any day. Clubs for sure. Clubs with the phones down and people dancing, not looking at you, just copping it. Always better. You know, festivals are great. A good festival was always a good gig, but clubs, to me, were, you know, I loved playing at places where people were just interested in the music and not not, you know, not holding phones up.
Yeah, intimate.
Yep,
Right in your
absolutely.
face.
Give me 150 people in a little sweat box. Let's go.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. And the final question, mate, what's the BPM? What do you think the best BPM is? You got a nightclub and you're in charge. What do you
Oh,
tell,
that's a tough one.
tell
I
the DJs?
suppose. I mean, I look. Generally speaking, I like music that sits between 120 and 130. Not too fast, not too slow. But you know, Dark and Long's 134 beats a minute, and my favourite record of all time. So I don't know. I know Axwell said a thing a while ago. His thing was 128. 128 beats per minute when he was DJing and big. So we did a lot of records at that tempo. I guess now with the deep house stuff, I probably at the moment a lot of the stuff that I'm making sits around 126, 125. But yeah, over 120, under 130 is normally where I sit.
Spot on. I reckon 128 is just about
Yep.
right. It's got a bit of energy.
Yes.
Not too slow.
125, and then you let the DJ pitch it up a little bit, so they'll speed it a little bit up a little faster only. Because I always expect the DJ is going to add 3 or 4% on the pitch control anyway. So,
Oh, awesome. Oh, mate, that wraps it up. This has been brilliant. It's this podcast blows me away. The legends that I've been able to sit down and talk to, man, and you're like one of the greatest in Australia to
thank you,
ever
mate.
do it.
I appreciate that. I'm a little bit humbled by those comments, but yeah, I tend to keep to myself. I don't stick my neck out too much, but it's nice to know that people are listening and taking a bit of interest in what I've done over the years. It's fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Ah, it's good, mate. Like I'm fascinated by the scene and the history. I've said it before on this podcast. I sort of always thought that I knew pretty much everything just
Yep.
through being a bit of a nerd and reading magazines and buying records and that. But like the more I do these podcasts, the more I learn about that. There's just so much more that I don't know, and
There
it's
is.
fascinating.
I find stuff out a lot. Just there's a lot of DJ producers. I don't know who does what stuff. You know, you find out stuff all the time behind the scenes. But yeah, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that you don't realize. You know, most of the bigger producer DJs and that nowadays have got teams of people behind them doing everything. So yeah, it is a bit of smoke and mirrors sometimes in this business. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking, I won't say his name actually, but I was talking to one of the DJs from that progressive gig that I was at, and he was telling me that he ghost produces for a couple of people. And yeah, I reckon there's so much of that going on.
But I do see what I do is different. I co-produce. I always have artists I'm working with. They come to the studio and they sit with me and we work together. All I do is say, right, what about this or this? Okay, we'll go that direction. Yep, no worries. So I make sure that they are part of the process. I don't like just making records behind the scene. I think that's cheating a little bit. You know, my mate Piero, he doesn't produce, but he sure knows what he wants. He's a great DJ. He's a guy who's been around the business in Melbourne as long as me. He sits with me in the studio. We kick up ideas. He's like, you know, and he plays me tracks. I say to him, okay, what's a big record you're playing at? All right, cool. Let's listen to that. Yep, cool. So we work together. I'm just the guy on the controls, but he's part of the process. Has to be. I won't work with people just blindly.
Yeah. I did a podcast with a hard house, really famous hard house DJ who now lives in Australia, Paul Glasby. He's released, I don't know, 100 records.
Yep.
But he said, I don't know. He said, I wouldn't know what to do in the studio. He said, I sit in the studio with the engineer, and he said, that's the way I've always done it. He said, sometimes I don't even look at the screen. I sit with my back to the computer so I don't see what's coming.
Yep.
You know, and I mean, he's made some of the biggest anthems ever.
Well, I work with Phil Kay, who's a very famous guy who unfortunately left us a few years ago. But you know, he was like that. He never twiddled the knobs. But if I told him, right, go over to that synthesizer and start, you know, bending knobs and making a sound, he would do it, and he would go, "Oh, that's pretty cool." You reckon? Yeah, cool. Let's record that. You know, so he was involved in the process. But he, you know, the records would come out different because he was there. Because no, take that out. That's rubbish. Let's do this. He would put up stop signs in front of me and say, that's not working. Get rid of that. That's a bit cheesy. Get rid of that sound. Righto, cool. And so they're part of the process, even though they're not actually controlling the knobs. They're actually part of the process.
Yeah, unreal. Oh, mate, thanks again. This has been
no worries,
awesome.
mate. Thanks for taking the time to chat to me. It's been lovely.
No worries.